Hi. I believe we are live. Oh, sorry. I look rough. I always look rough. It's always been a long day. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. For some reason, couldn't find the go live button. Like I had it scheduled ahead of time, and then I guess I'm kind of dumb. But I finally figured it out. So here we are, a couple minutes late, ready to go. I know that my son's girlfriend is at a ball game, so probably Tess isn't going to show up. I'll miss you, Tess. Love you. But she'll watch it back, so she knows I love her and I miss her. Like I said before on the previous videos, there's a couple of things I want to do before I get started. I just kind of had this random, what did you have for dinner, right? I had salmon. I did a grilled salmon with dill sauce and oven roasted potatoes with fresh basil and parmesan and a fresh cucumber, tomato, onion salad with a little bit of Italian dressing and fresh basil in it. It was so good. It was yummy. And then we had some Nanaimo bars that were left over from yesterday because I made a big batch. So we had a couple little teeny pieces of Nanaimo bars. They're good, but they're rich. So I don't usually eat very much of them, but they're so yummy. And then the other thing I wanted to do at the start of each stream is promote my handmade stuff. I make craft items by hand. I used to go to a lot of craft shows and fairs. I haven't been able to do much of that lately. I want to get back into it, but I have hundreds of things I've made by hand, and I have over 200 items in my store, but only half of what I made is in my store because it's a lot of work to get it in there, and I've been so busy. But this, what I'm wearing, I made this. It's really cute. My lighting is not good, so it's hard to see it, but it's a little heart necklace. When my son's girlfriend was doing prom, when she in her senior year of high school, I offered to make her prom dress, and so I did. I sewed her prom dress, and it was gorgeous. It was maroon, and then I made a matching cummerbund bow tie pocket kerchief so that my son's tuxedo had the matching accessories that were made out of the same fabric as her dress. They looked so cute. But I also made her some jewelry to match. So I made some necklaces and earrings and different things. And this is one of the things I made. And then she picked out what she wanted. And then I had several other pieces. And it's actually been one of my favorites because it goes with a bunch of my different stuff. And it used to have a cute little fake diamond hanging on it, but I lost it. So I'll put another one on someday when I have 2 minutes where I'm thinking about it. I also started working with clay recently, so I've made some kind of cute little clay things. I was just playing with these little sunflowers, but they're so cute, I think. I like stuff like this to put because I get these folders and notebooks and I like to distinguish which ones are which. So I'll make these little sunflower things or some different colors and put them on the outside of my books to keep track because I have so much going on and I always write everything down. So I have these different folders and books floating around. So these are fun for that. I actually use them for that. So now I am going to get started on the reading, and we are on chapter 5. And we'll do a little recap of yesterday. So Kit Tyler got to her aunt's house. She has all these tons of clothes. She's really, she grew up wealthy, and this family she's come to, not only do they not have a lot of money, but if you don't know a lot about the history at the time in the 1600s, the Puritans were very strict, and they lived a simple life. I mean, like the Amish, only strict, severe people. But they were also had a very high moral, like they hated slavery. They did not believe in slavery. They did not believe in mistreating people that way, which is obviously a good quality. But they were also kind of the ones that would burn witches at the stake, which is kind of funny, because they were afraid of black magic and, whatever, all that stuff. So she grew up kind of, I kind of hate to use this comparison, but it's almost like the difference between like a kind of a quite a liberal person and a super, super conservative person, right? Conservative people are not just out there with everything. And she kind of is. She grew up running wild. She swam, she reads, she does all these things that ladies didn't really do at the time. And she's also, she's wealthy. So she had servants. She had her own slave girl that took care of her. She's never done anything for herself. She has fancy, expensive clothes. She grew up rich. And she comes to this family that are super religious, extremely strict, very plain. They all have like one set of clothing. They live in a very small house. They work really, really hard. So it's like the clash of these completely different lifestyles. So it's interesting, but it was quite a bit that way. Now, there are several things in this book because, technically it's a historical novel, right? Because it's set way back in history. It's not modern. There are a few things that they get wrong. Number one, there are contractions littered throughout this book. They did not say can't or isn't or shouldn't back 400 years ago. There was no such thing as a contraction. They said should not, cannot, will not, do not. They did not use contractions, and they're all over in this book. In their language, it was not like that. And another thing is the language is quite, I don't know actually what year this, I should look up what year this was published. I'm not seeing. 1958. So this was published in the 60s. So the language is somewhat more how they would have talked in the 60s than they would have talked in the 1860s, right? Not the 18, I keep saying the 1800s, the 1600s. If you were dropped into a conversation in the 1600s, you would have such a hard time even following what they were saying. Because even though it was English and the words are the same, the type of language they used, there was no slang. Everything was very proper, and people spoke very intelligently. And the way they worded their sentences. In fact, there's a book that I want to read on this channel that wasn't written like in 1950 to be set back in the 1600s. It was written in the 1600s. A woman in the 1600s wrote this novel. And I know they say, oh, women couldn't do anything. They couldn't write books. Oh, bullshit. There were books. Women wrote books. And it's a favorite book of mine. But it's hard to follow the conversations because the way they spoke was so different than the way we speak at the time. So it'll be interesting when we do that. And I kind of went off on a tangent this time, didn't I? Anyway, so that is something I noticed about this, is the way they speak and the language that they use is not at all accurate in how they would have spoken to each other in the time. But it is easier for us to understand now because it's closer to the way we speak to each other. So there is that. Okay, so chapter 5. These are the only clothes I have, protested Kit. If they are not suitable, I shall stay here with Mercy. Through the crystal Sabbath morning, the meeting-house bell tolled steadily. Matthew Wood stood on the threshold of his home, his bushy eyebrows massed close together as he surveyed the 3 women who waited to accompany him. Beside the plain blue homespun and white linen which modestly clothed Aunt Rachel and Judith, Kit's flowered silk gave her the look of some vivid tropical bird lighted by mistake. On a strange shore. The modish bonnet with curling white feathers seemed to her uncle a crowning affront. You will mock the Lord's assembly with such frippery, he roared. This was the second time this morning that her uncle's wrath had descended on her head. Give me just a second. An hour ago, she had declined to go to meetings, saying airily that she and her grandfather had seldom attended divine service except for Christmas Mass. What an uproar she had caused! There was no Church of England in Wethersfield, her uncle had informed her, and furthermore, since she was now a member of his household, she would forget her popish ideas and attend meeting like a God-fearing woman. This time, however, he was baffled. He knew as well as she that there were no garments to spare in that house. So it's not like she can borrow from somebody else. Nobody has other clothes, right? They don't have a lot. Rachel laid a placating hand on her husband's sleeve. Matthew, she pleaded, everyone knows that the child has not had time to get new clothes. Besides, it would be wasteful to throw these aside. Catherine looks very pretty, and I'm proud to have her go with us. Judith was certainly not proud of her. Judith was as outraged as her father, though for a different reason. Her pretty mouth had a sulky droop, and the long fringe of lashes barely hid the envy and rebellion in her blue eyes. This first venture outside her new home was not starting out auspiciously for Kit, but as they set out along the road, she could not repress her curiosity and bouncing spirits. If they were going to church, then there must be a town somewhere beyond this narrow road. Under a brilliant blue sky, Wethersfield had far more welcome than on that first foggy dawn. There was a delicious crispness in the air. The family walked along High Street, past a row of substantial frame houses, and came out on a small square clearing. Kit looked about eagerly. Is it far to the town? She whispered to Judith. There was silence. This is the town, said Judith stiffly. The town? Kit stared, too aghast to realize her own tactlessness. There was not a single stone building or shop in sight. The meeting house stood in the center of the clearing, a square, unpainted wooden structure topped by a small turret. As they crossed the clearing, Kit recoiled at the objects that stood between her and the meeting house: a pillory, a whipping post, and stocks. Inside the small building, on rows of benches, sat the good folk of Wethersfield, men on one side and women on the other. At the door, Matthew Wood left his family and moved with dignity to the deacon's bench directly in front of the pulpit. Rachel preceded the two girls down the aisle to the family bench. As Kit moved behind her, the astonishment of the assembled townspeople met her with the impact of a gathering wave. It was not so much a sound as a stillness so intent that it made her ears ring. She knew that her cheeks were flaming, but she held her head high under the feathered bonnet. The Puritan service seemed to her as plain and unlovely as the bare board walls of the meeting house. She felt a moment's surprise when her uncle stepped forward to line the psalm. His firm nasal voice set the tune and pace, one line at a time, and the congregation repeated it after him. By the time the long psalm was over, Kit was glad to sit down, but presently she longed to stand again. The hard edge of the narrow pew bit into her thigh, in spite of every gingerly effort to shift her weight. Kit's gaze flickered over the other church folk. A varied lot they were. Not all of them shared her uncle's opinions of seemly garb. Some were as fashionably dressed as Kit herself, but the majority were soberly and poorly clad, and here and there, in the furthermost pews, Kit glimpsed the familiar black faces that must be slaves. All of them, however, were alike in their reverent silence. How could they sit there without twitching a muscle, even with the black flies buzzing under their bonnet brims? It was impossible that they could be listening to the sermon. She could not keep her mind on it for an instant. A steady rustling sound told her that a few muscles were as unruly as her own. On the stairs leading to the gallery, nearly 20 small boys were clustered, shoulder to shoulder, and the solid ranks undulated with the constant jerking of restless elbows straining under tight woolen jackets. A rosy-cheeked boy on the second step, with one fleeting motion, captured a fly and held it imprisoned against his knee. 4 boys nearest him were convulsed. Snickers spilled out past the hands they clapped over their mouths. A man stepped menacingly from the corner, brandishing a long pole, and Kit winced as 2 sharp raps descended on each luckless lad. The cause of all the commotion sat serenely, his rapt, innocent gaze never straying from the minister's face, his hands still cupped over the imprisoned fly. Kit felt a giggle rising in her own throat, and looking frantically for distraction, caught John Holbrook's eye. He looked away without a sign of recognition. Bother these people! Look at Judith sitting there with her hands folded in her lap. Didn't her feet ever go to sleep? Nevertheless, if this were a test of endurance, then she could sit through as well as these New Englanders. She tilted her chin so that one plume swept gracefully against her cheek, discreetly curled and uncurled her numb toes inside the kid slippers, and set herself to endure. The sun slanted directly downward through the chinks in the roof when the sermon ended. It must have been a good 2 hours, and would, Kit suspected, have been much longer had not the minister's voice grown increasingly hoarse till it threatened to fail altogether. Kit rose thankfully for the final prayer and stood respectfully with the rest of the congregation till the minister had passed down the aisle to the door. Outside the meeting house, the Reverend Gershom Bulkley took Kit's hand in his. "So, this is the orphan from Barbados," he rasped. "How grateful you must be, young lady, for the kindness of your aunt and uncle in your time of need." Two deacons also took her hand and stressed the word grateful. Had Uncle Matthew informed the whole town that he had taken her in out of charity? If so, then she was obviously a surprise to them, by the suspicion and downright hostility with which the deacons' wives were surveying her from feathered hat to slippered toe. She did not look like a pauper. Let them make what they liked of that. Most of the churchgoers did not come near her. A little distance away she glimpsed Goodwife Cruff, surrounded by a close huddle of whispering women, all darting venomous glances in Kit's direction. Kit turned a defiant back on them, but first she sent a friendly wave to Prudence, whose peaked little face turned pink with delight. With a flash of pleasure she saw John Holbrook approaching, but her impulsive greeting froze as she saw that Reverend Bulkeley had the young man firmly by the elbow. In the shadow of his teacher, an extra staidness had fallen over the young divinity student, and his smile was lukewarm with dignity. Not till John had courteously acknowledged the minister's introductions did he turn to Kit. "I was glad to see you in meeting," he said gravely. "You must have found the sermon uplifting." Kit was nonplussed. "How very fortunate we were to hear Dr. Bulkeley," John continued, taking her silence for agreement. "He rarely preaches now since his retirement. 'Twas a truly remarkable sermon. Every word seemed to me inspired." Kit stared at him. Yes, actually, he was serious. Dr. Bulkeley had moved out of earshot, and there was no hint of flattery in John's earnest words. She was floundering for an answer when Judith spoke. "Dr. Bulkeley's sermons are always inspired," she said demurely, "especially when he preaches about the final judgment." John marked Judith's presence with surprise and respect. Under the white bonnet her face was sweetly serious, her eyes dazzlingly blue. "His learning is incredible," he told her. "He can recite entire chapters of Scripture, and he knows law and medicine as well." John's blush as he found the learned doctor again at his elbow was all the more flattering. Dr. Bulkeley glowed indulgently. "I do know a bit of Scripture," he admitted, "but this young man has made a good start, a very good start indeed." "You must bring your new pupil with you when you come to dine with us on Thursday," smiled Rachel Wood, and with a gracious acceptance Dr. Bulkeley steered his charge away. "And now, Catherine dear, here is another neighbor you must meet. Mistress Ashby, my niece from Barbados." Kit curtsied, noting with satisfaction that this was woman who did not despise vain adornment. Mistress Ashby's dove-colored damask with its start over. Mistress Ashby's dove-colored damask with its gilt-edged lace must have come straight from England. "And her son William," continued her aunt. Braced to meet the reserve and suspicion she had encountered at every introduction so far, Kit was startled to meet the unmistakably dazzled gaze of William Ashby, and unconsciously she rewarded him with the first genuine smile she had managed this morning. Kit had no idea of what happened to her thin, plain features when she smiled. William was speechless. "Ah, he's impressed, eh?" "Yeah." As she turned to follow her aunt and Judith, Kit knew for certain that he had not moved, and that if she looked back, she would see his sturdy frame planted motionless in the path. She did not look back, but she knew. Yeah, we know. Well, yeah, women, we know. We know when we've made an impression. I remember there had been once or twice when I didn't even occur to me that somebody was like thought highly of you or was impressed by something, and you catch a glimpse of a look on their face and you're like, oh, Didn't even know. But then you see it and you know. Walking back along the road, Judith signaled Kit to fall behind the others. You never mentioned that there was a handsome man on the boat, she whispered accusingly. Handsome? You mean John Holbrook? You certainly seem to know each other well enough. Well, there was no one else to talk to, but most of the time he sat by himself and studied. Have you set your cap for him? Said Judith bluntly, which I don't know if you know, but back in those days that meant, do you like him? Gonna try to marry him? Kit colored to the edge of her bonnet. She would never get used to Judith's outspokenness. Goodness, no, she protested. Whatever made you think of such a thing? I just wondered, Judith responded, and as Matthew Wood turned a stern look back at them, both girls walked on in silence. You certainly made an impression on William Ashby, Judith ventured presently. There was no point in denying it. Perhaps because I was someone new, said Kit. Perhaps. You aren't exactly pretty, you know, but naturally William would be impressed by a dress like that. You know, it's interesting. Back in the day, people were not delusional. I mean, if a girl wasn't that pretty, she knew it, she admitted it, and she did other things, would dress pretty or make sure she could sing or draw or do something to acquire a talent, right? So that she would be appealing in some way and try to, you know, have nice manners or whatever. But these days you see the ugliest people being like, oh, I'm a 10, I'm so hot, such a babe. And to have confidence is one thing, but to be absolutely delusional is another thing entirely. I mean, and that is one thing I kind of respect is their honesty with if they weren't that pretty. Not everybody's beautiful, right? Most people aren't. That's what average means is the rest of us, you know. And so, you know, back then they didn't. They kind of acknowledged if they weren't that pretty. So and obviously Judith is prettier than Kit, but she's less impulsive, but maybe a little more jealous and bitter kind of. I don't know. She has less of a friendly personality. I don't know. Yeah, sorry. Back to the book. Perhaps you aren't exactly pretty, you know, but naturally William would be impressed by a dress like that. Kit wanted to change the subject. Wisps of smoke were beginning to rise from the chimneys of several small log lean-tos along the roadway. They seemed to offer a safe topic. Do people live in those tiny houses? She inquired. Of course not. Those are Sabbath houses. Then Judith emerged from her own musings long enough to explain. Families that live too far to go home between services cook their meal there on Sunday, and in the winter they can warm themselves at a fire. A chill trickle of doubt began to cool the glow of the noontime sun and the memory of William Ashby's admiration. Surely Judith could not mean. Did you say between services? Kit inquired fearfully. Didn't you know there's a second service in the afternoon? Kit was appalled. Do you mean we have to go? Of course we go, snapped Judith. That is what the Sabbath is for. Kit came to a halt, and suddenly she stamped her foot in the dusty road. I won't do it, she declared. I absolutely won't endure that all over again. But one look ahead at her uncle's shoulders, rigid in their Sunday black, and she knew that she would. Almost choking with helpless rage, she stumbled after Judith, who had moved ahead, too absorbed to even notice. Oh, why had she ever come to this hateful place? She's kind of cute and charming, but she's also kind of snotty and selfish. So you kind of like her, but sometimes you want to smack her. I mean, I do. Anyway, that's how I feel. I definitely like her a lot, but I have little patience with people who are spoiled and entitled. But, you know, in a situation like she's in, she'll learn quick enough, I think. Anyway, that's the end of chapter 5. Chapter 6 is tomorrow. Tess did recommend, she said, on the weekends you should do like a double chapter and read 2 chapters instead of just one. And if I can, if my baby's not too sad and if my husband doesn't mind keeping the children, I was going to try to kind of let my little boy and my little girl be in here, but they're so noisy that you probably wouldn't be able to hear. So my husband takes them for me. So we'll see. I'll consider it, and if it works out, maybe we will. Because, yeah, she's like, I'm so invested, and it's only one chapter every day. Oh, which is fun. That's fun for me that she enjoys it so much that she wishes I was doing twice as much. That's awesome. Anyway, I will end there, and we will see you all tomorrow, maybe for a double chapter. We'll see.